Good morning. It's so exciting to see you face to face for a while. I'm usually on the front row, and I hate turning around being nosy, but I want to see who's here. Now I get to see everybody all at once. Could have get an amen for an engaging group. All right. I have been asked to speak for 5 minutes about my coming into music when I was as little as the kids that you saw just a few minutes ago. Most of you probably know that I am a native of Glade Spring. What you may not know is that I currently live in the house where I was born. You didn't know that, did you? All right. There is more to the story. The story goes that my mother and all of her siblings were born in that same house. I'm getting on new territory now. The most surprising story is that my grandmother was also born in that same house. She was born in 1874. The house was built in 1870, 5 years before the town of Glade Spring was incorporated. Could have get an amen for all of that. What about music? My grandmother could play the piano. I never knew her because she died before I was born, but I had lots of stories about her growing up and where she got her education, which was difficult back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. My mom could play the piano also, and what did my mom and grandmother have in common? They both played at Ebenezer Methodist, the church where I shall be today at 1 o'clock doing more playing as well. You would soon conclude then that if my grandmother could play, if my mom could play, then it was just a given that I would be able to play. Well, there were some factors that sort of ran against that. One factor was that my mom was divorced, and that in my early years, financial problems were abounding in our family. The family was very small, my mom, my brother, and me, just 3 of us. At least we had a house. At least we didn't have to pay mortgage. At least we didn't have to pay rent. But can you imagine how a house of 100 years old, maybe some of you don't know this, but houses have a tendency to fall apart in places. Houses have a tendency to leak in places. The list goes on and on. Sometimes it will happen to new houses as well. Could have get an amen for that. All right. So what was the deal? The deal was that I liked music even though there was not much music in the house. There was no piano there. There was no television there. Well, that wasn't because we were poor. It's because in 1950, what if you'd had a television? There were no television stations in this area unless you tried to get one that was 200 miles away, and that would be a challenge. So what did I do a lot? I listened to the radio. And radios back in 1950, those of you who are relatively young would be amazed by how non-exciting they were. Some of you might not know what an AM radio is, but I grew up on AM radio. And there had to be a wire outside to bring in the signal. And what kind of signals did I get in Glade Spring in 1950? Well, not a lot of diversity, let's put it that way, okay? But I liked the music. I really didn't care who was singing. As long as they were singing, it was satisfying to me. Who did I hear on the radio? People like the McGuire sisters, people like Patti Page, Perry Como, Then there were some religious singers, like the Oak Ridge Boys, like the Chuck Wagon Gang. Am I touching some points here that some of us of a certain age might recall? I loved all of that. And my mom saw that I enjoyed music. By the way, the reason there was no piano in our home in 1950, there had been one. It was my grandmother's piano, but my mom had to sell it to make ends meet. So again, the financial situation could have kept me out of the music group, but my mom would not have that. First thing she got me was a toy piano, about this big, that big, about 10 keys. But I didn't know any of the keys, so it didn't matter whether it had 5 keys or 6 keys. I didn't know what to do with them. Eventually, I started playing with a note or two after church, trying to replicate what I had heard in the sanctuary. And it was starting to work. So my mother steps in again after my brother. And by the way, my brother was 12 years older than me. So when he finished high school in 1955, it was just my mom and me, but we had money to deal with the two of us. She found a piano that was going to be sold, and she bought it for about $60. It took her months, perhaps years, to pay for it in installments. I have a picture in one of my latest books of what my face looked like the day the piano was delivered. I can remember it. It was fall of 1957. I won't tell you how old I was then, because you might do some math and figure out how old I am then. I'm just kidding. Many of you can look and tell, but he sure ain't 30 for sure. Well, I had a piano, but how was I going to learn how to play it? Not money available for piano lessons, even if there were piano lessons available in Glade Spring in 1952, 53, or whatnot. So what did we do? Well, we didn't go to the computer and Google it. So what options did we have? We picked up a newspaper, or maybe it was a magazine, something that had a coupon on the back. And you clip the coupon out, and what did the coupon say? Learn how to play the piano. Send us $8 or $7. It wasn't more than 10. I know it was relatively cheap. We cut it out, sent it in, and said, oh, this is going to be good. Well, what did I get in the mail? I got a cardboard thingamajig, if that's a word, a thing to put on the piano to the left of middle C. And it showed you 3 keys to type, not type, but press, all at the same time to create a chord, a major chord. I know a little music, not much. And then you take this finger and play the soprano note on the top of music. And that's how I started playing in 1957. To not bore you with details, I kind of learned fast. In 2 years, I was doing all the music at our church, which I'm still doing 65 years later. Could I get an amen for that? Well, I have picked up a lot of skills along the way. Learning to play by ear, as we call it, is something that fits into the story that Lindsay just told about gift. They told me when I was 10 years old that I had this gift. I don't think I understood then, but I'm thankful to God that He's allowed me to live long enough where I get it now. I understand it now. And I also am thankful that I got my foundation at the little church on the other side of the tracks in Glade Spring, where I have seriously been playing off and on since 1959, from 59 to 2000 and whatever this is. Amen for that. And then I had to go away to college, and our little choir and our little music at the little church in Glade Spring kind of died a little bit. I would come back occasionally and play when I was home during the summer, Christmas time, and so forth. My mom played in my absence, and she was playing right up until she got, her health was not well, not great in many respects. And so I had to get jobs in other places. Some of you will be maybe surprised to know that my first teaching job was in Baltimore, Maryland. I was there 5 years. My second job, college professor in Richmond at a community college there for 27 years. And I taught programming and other computer stuff, computers and piano. Well, there's some similarity there, I guess, but if you bend it a little bit, you'll understand. When my mother finally declined in health, I decided to move home to Glade Spring. The year was 2001 to care for her. And surprisingly, I got a job at Emory and Henry. I didn't think I would get a job in this area, not because the people aren't nice or anything like that. I just didn't see how I would fit in to the mindset and the things that are going on, whatnot, but I was shown differently. I was accepted greatly. And what happened was, all those other places where I taught, many of them didn't know that I could even play the piano. At Emory and Henry, not only did they know, they asked me to play. Not every day. Can't teach music, can't teach myself. But every once in a while, I would end up at a piano somewhere. And even though I am retired from Emory, I still do it when they ask me. Could I get an amen for that? Keep on asking here, all right? That takes me to where we are today. When I first came to home, I passed this church often, by the way, on my way to high school in Bristol every day. That's another story, and we'll talk about sometime. But I said, I wonder what it looks like inside this building, this church building. I was awed by all the churches that are sort of a congregation of churches right here in Abingdon, Virginia. And so the folks that have the MLK celebrations asked me my very first year back, would you come and play a song at our MLK celebration in January? And I said, yeah, where's it going to be? Abingdon United Methodist. I started smiling. I want to see what it looks like. Talk about awesome, if that's a word that old people like me can use. It's totally awesome, especially the piano that I got to play the first time. The downside was the service lasted 2 hours, and the song I was supposed to play was the very last thing there. But I kept on sitting, twisting and turning, but sitting nonetheless. When Pastor C, asked me to meet up with Lindsay and see what we could do in service, at first I said to myself, what you talking about? I didn't know what he meant, but now I know. Now I know, and I'm thankful that I know. And I'm thankful that I have been popping up, if that's another word that I'm allowed to use. I pop up every once in a while, and it is to my pleasure and to my honor to do so. And with that being said, I will shut up and let Lindsay do her thing.
Thank you, Jerry. To know Jerry is to love him. I'm telling y'all, I told him earlier, last week I was at the store and I got stuck in line. This little girl was in front of me. She was about 4 years old, and we were at a point where there was people in front of us and people behind us, and she and I were just there at a standoff, and she was just looking at me. You know how the kids will do that, just look at you. And I was just looking at her, and she said, "Hi." I said, "Hi." And she said, "I like you." I said, "Well, I like you too." And she just kept looking. And that line wasn't going anywhere, and she just kept looking. And she said, "You know, you're kind." I said, "Well, you are too." And she said, "Thank you. I try to be." Well, we just stood there and kept there looking and looking and looking. And the line, I thought, well, I'm just going to have to leave, I guess, because we're stuck here. And finally, as it started to move, she turned around and she said, "Hey, I don't even know you, and I just met you, but I love you." And you know, I thought of Jerry, because the very first time I met him, I didn't know him, and I just met him, and I loved him, and I still feel that way today. So thank you, Jerry. Y'all, I know y'all feel the same way about him. Paul had this great idea, and he said, "I'm going to get Jerry to come to church and tell his backstory, and it's fascinating, and it's interesting, and they're going to love it. And he's going to tell all about it." I said, "That's a great idea." And he said, "And then you're going to tell yours." And I said, "You have had better ideas, but okay." He kind of dug in on it, and I said, "Well, then let's just do it, I guess." Y'all hear from me a lot with children and with music. I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I come from. When I was growing up, I grew up in a tiny town, a coal town, a holler, St. Charles. It's in Lee County. You might think you know what a holler is, but I can assure you, unless you've been to St. Charles, you don't know what a holler is. My daddy is here, and I'm so glad. We know what a holler is. There was coal dust on our feet and coal dust on our porches, and we had very little, and we had a lot of love and a lot of family to share that with, and we are thankful for that. But I had a little church, a United Methodist church, and on Sunday nights we would have something called Sunday singing. Now, I don't think that was the real word for it. It was probably just called church, but I called it Sunday singing because on Sunday nights we would go to church, and you could just, y'all won't believe this, you could just call out the name of the song you wanted to hear, and we'd sing it. You'd be sitting over here, and you just call out a number. Bam, she'd play it. You might be over here, call it out, she'd play it, we'd sing it. I loved that, as you can imagine, and there was only about 8 of us in the whole church, so we could go around and around and around till we sang that whole hymnal. It was my favorite thing to do. That was probably an early clue about there was going to be a church music theme there. But after church on Sunday nights, my mama, who sang this little ladies group. You might call them a choir, but they were just 5 or 6 ladies who were, you know, a teacher and a nurse and a stay-at-home mom, and they liked to sing. And they would stay after that Sunday singing, and they would sing. And I think a prerequisite for being in that group was you had to have a wild child who could run around the sanctuary, because me and all these other little kids would be carrying on while our mamas sang. But more often than not, I would sit in that pew and watch my mama. And my mama would sing with her eyes closed and her hands out like this, something that not until years later, when I would see a video of myself, I realized that I do. And I was enamored with her, and not because she was the world's greatest singer. She had no training, no classes, no nothing, but when she sang, I felt something, and other people did too. When she sang, you knew you had been in the presence of something more powerful than just these 5 little ladies in a coal town church. That's the church that raised me. That's where I grew up. I continued to go to that church. My mama was had come from just as you know, no great means. She was poor. My mother and daddy had very little growing up, but they made sure that I had what I needed, and I needed a lot, believe me. As you might have guessed, I was high maintenance from early on, but I had an interest in music, and my mother somehow, I don't even know how she found out about these things because there was no internet, but she would scrap together some money, and she would somehow get me to Knoxville, and I would watch the ballet, and I didn't even, sorry. I would watch the orchestra and classical music, and I didn't even think those things were real. I thought they were something that was just existed on TV. But she found a way to get me there, and as my interest grew more and more, I didn't even know it was possible to go study music. I didn't even know college wasn't a given. Y'all, I'll tell y'all, in this area, it's kind of a given. You graduate high school, you go to college. That's what my kids are doing, and that was not a given where I was from. Education was a luxury. My parents had worked hard to survive so that I could have options. They didn't have options. And they gave me these options to study, to go on, to travel, and I did. At that point, still yet, I had not considered or explored the relationship between my singing and God. I liked to sing. I liked music. I knew I felt something. I didn't have the language or the maturity or the depth to know what it was. It wasn't until I got to college and I started singing in a choir there. I had mentors in David St. Clair, who you know from this church, in the Davis family, Mark and Chick, who were legacy legends at that college with the concert choir. And they taught me about using my voice in a new way. That's when I started hearing the word gift in a new way. I had no idea. I thought it sounded kind of highfalutin. And listen, back in the holler, highfalutin is about as worst of the thing you could be. And I thought that if I said I have a gift, and someone said you have a gift, it felt highfalutin to me. And it took me years to realize that what people meant and what I came to know, God had given me a gift. Not just the way my voice sounds, but the way I feel music, the way I express music back to you, the way I don't know, music can flow through me into you, and we know it has the power. It transforms me, it can transform you, it transcends everything, and that is what I started to realize as I got to Emory and started furthering my education. I leaned in more there, and I was singing just everywhere I could. Listen, I was singing it, don't get it wrong, I was singing in bars, I was singing gigs, I was playing weddings, I would sing at a funeral, I'd sing at a concert, I would sing with an orchestra, I was singing everywhere that I could sing because that I was tied to that music. But something, when I would come back to church music, I felt anchored in I knew that was home. I knew that was where I felt the most whole. That's where I could be comforted when I was upset. That's where I could express myself. That's where I didn't feel so lonely. That's where I felt seen, because I knew I was using something that God had given me. When I came here first to this church as a guest, it didn't take long for me to start singing in the choir and start working with children and volunteering and all this stuff. And I got offered a job here, and I didn't see that coming. That wasn't on my radar to work at a church. I called my mama and I said, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "They have offered me a job at that church. They want me to work. They want me to work at that church, singing and working with kids." And I thought, this just can't be. I said, "Mom, this is crazy." I said, "Do you think this sounds crazy? Are you shocked?" And she said, "No." She said, "I'm not shocked." She said, "When you were a little girl, before you remember standing at the pew and watching me sing, before you remember any of that running around the sanctuary while the hymns were playing," she said, "I remember being 21 years old and having a baby and feeling lost and scared and depressed and battling." And she said, "I carried you into that sanctuary." And she said, "I knelt down at the altar," and she said, she held me as a baby, and she said she laid me there beside her at the altar, and she said, "Oh, I've got a real mess." And she was talking to God, and she said, "I am a mess." And she said, "I don't know what to do." And she said, "But I know I've got this baby. And if you'll take her, I'll give her to you. I don't know what she's going to do, but I want you to do something with her. And I'll give her to you. I'll cooperate. I'll do whatever I need to do." That story I didn't know until after I took a job working at a church. She had let me go my whole life, 30 years, without knowing that. I think it was obvious that she knew I had a gift. She wanted me to use it, and she was just waiting on me to come into it. I'm glad I did, because now I'm here with y'all. It's been beyond my wildest dreams to share in a way, and I can't believe, I'm used to sharing with y'all my songs and with the children. I didn't really think I had much to say. Glenn and Pastor Paul have been encouraging, and they said, "We think you do have something to say, and we think people need to hear it," and so I thank you for that. Bringing Jerry into the mix, Paul said to me 2 years ago, "I've got somebody you need to meet." And it went about like that little girl who saw me. I met him, and boy, we connected. Our souls knew each other, I'm convinced. We met, and when we started making music, that was sort of the end, or the beginning, rather. Not only did we share the same style, we share a musical language, but Jerry and I share, I think, the same feeling that we acknowledge that sometimes when there is nothing left to say, you don't know what to say, you can say it with music. Glenn said to me earlier this week, people forget words and they forget conversations. You don't know what somebody said. You can't remember what you said, but you never forget the song. Jerry and I are going to share with you a little bit of the first song we ever played together. We hope it will remind you, and we hope that you will stay open to the power of music and its ability to transcend and transform. Amen.